I don't really do talks. I really prefer if we have a conversation. I don't really enjoy sitting in a room or standing in a room and listening to someone talk. So I wouldn't expect you to enjoy that so much from me. So I would prefer if we have a conversation or a discussion right from the beginning. It's a little easier if we talk about things as we go along rather than I talk for 45 minutes and then we try to remember what I said and what you thought and we come up with some questions. So y'all can move on in closer. If you do ask questions or talk, please speak loudly. I have my hearing aids turned up, but it doesn't mean I'm going to be able to hear really well. Yes?
I would like to know more about this boat.
The boat. Okay. All right. Anything in particular? Oh, before you go there, not only do I not do talks, I really don't answer questions. Well, wait. There's always kind of a caveat with that. I may not give you the answer you want. I may answer your question with more questions because it's really more important what you see and think. I know what I saw and thought because it's here. So whether we're in a classroom or in a talk, there's at least one person here that knows that I don't answer questions, or at least really well. So let's go to the boat. Everybody good with going to the boat? Okay. So go ahead. It's over here. Okay. Everything is untitled. In fact, the title of the show is Sin Título, which is Spanish for untitled. Other than some work that I did my very first year of graduate school and the year prior to that getting ready, I have never titled anything. It's throughout my career, I've simplified and simplified and simplified. And one of the first things I got away from was trying to come up with titles. Titles are a very important thing for the content of the work. They also are used a lot of times to be clever, and sometimes they're used primarily, for me, they were to be used for cataloging. It's really hard if you just start numbering pieces back in 1993, number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4. So I give a parenthetical title. It's untitled. Parenthetically, it's a Whitehall skiff, which that tells me it's the boat. And so I don't have to worry later on. Plus, when we're installing and we bring up a big truck and we are unloading a bunch of, and this, believe it or not, is not a really heavy exhibition, but all of this stuff is disassembled, so I can tell my crew, mainly my wife and my girls and anyone else that helps, I can say as we unload, they can show me what it is, and I can say boat, and it goes here, and barrel vault would go here. And so we just stack everything up to build it. So there is a sign over here, but it is untitled, and then the parenthetical title is Whitehall skiff. That's because that's what it is. It's a 1920 Whitehall skiff rowboat. It's made by the Michigan Steel Boat Company, and y'all can't do this, but I can. It's made out of steel. I found it and purchased it outside of Boston, Massachusetts. And so that's the nuts and bolts. Yes?
Tell us the story of how you found it.
I spend many a night and late at night and days searching on eBay. In the old days when I first started, I was in junk stores and antique stores and salvage yards all the time. And over time, eBay came along and became my sit in my chair, travel to junk stores everywhere. And so I found this on eBay in Boston, just outside Boston. Had it shipped here on a boat shipper. Guy had a truck with a trailer with all sorts of racing boats on it, these beautiful, lightweight, carbon racing boats, and my boat. We had to unload a couple to get to my boat, and his boats, some of them were, 30, 40 feet long, and we could pick them up with one hand and just bring them over and lay them down. And then we got to my boat, and we had to do some hoisting and moving and everything. He did say he traveled from New England across the country to California and the West Coast, and then back again, picking up and dropping off boats the whole way. And when he pulled up in front of the house with all these boats, he told me, he said, I've been 2 months, moving around, and he said, all everyone wants to talk about is that boat. He said, everyone with these fancy boats is really dying to know what you're going to do with this thing. He said, are you going to restore it? And I said, no, I'm just going to hang it. And he was like, okay. And so anyway, that's where the boat came from. A lot of things, I don't have endless resources. If I did, you could just go out and find things and bring them in. Really old, oversized lumber. I have some oversized lumber that I bought from a guy in North Carolina. I bought it on eBay. He was tearing down a tobacco factory, and it's 120, 150-year-old lumber. And he's tearing it down board by board, and I negotiated a deal, and he shipped it to me. And the lumber, Norman Doran plywood, is up the street from my studio, and I don't do as much anymore, but I used to do a lot of work with them. I would buy a lot of lumber, and so I asked if I could rent them and their forklift and the driver. And they were nice enough to they said, just call us when the truck gets in, we'll come down and unload it for you. So they unloaded 2 pallet loads of bigger lumber. Most of this lumber I got here in Tulsa. If Dean West is in the room, I don't know. But Timber and Beam Solutions here in Tulsa, he tears down barns and old buildings all over the place. Most of this lumber I got at his place. It used to be just right over here, but he's moved. I told him what I wanted, what I was looking for, which in the most cases is the stuff nobody else wants. And he showed me a lot of really nice stuff that I couldn't afford. And then he said, but if you want, he said, come out here. And we went all the way to the back of the lot, and he had several pallets with all of this stuff and more. And he said, if you want that stuff, he said, it's been here forever. He said, I'll make you a deal. And I was like, really? And he said, yeah. He said, there was a pallet that was about half full, and he said, just put everything on there that you want. So Sandra and I were out there hauling this big lumber over and putting it on the pallet, and we just all loaded that pallet up. I had borrowed a trailer, and so he worked up a price for me, and I made two big pieces of sculpture with that. The boat and the wooden fish that was at Mainside in Norman. So that's how I kind of gather everything. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
Is it coincidental that these are 108 by 108?
It was sort of. I did them for Mainside. Let's talk about the tape just for a second. the first time I used tape measures in work was a piece that was essentially just this piece right here. If you happen to look at my website and you go way back to when I was in graduate school, I did a site-specific installation piece in an old building that they were going to tear down at North Campus, North Base we called it, where we all had our studios. You remember how the old buildings were, they were just crap. But they were built by the Navy in like the early 40s, and so they were really, really sturdy. And so the people out there that managed them, she told me I could essentially have a building to work in as long as I signed a waiver that if someone got hurt or killed, or the university wasn't liable, and it would be on me. So I said, okay. So I got this building. It had a dock and big garage doors. That was the only way you could control light. And the guy that had been running a junk operation in there for, I don't know, 30 years. And so he had left, and they were going to demolish the building. And I had to clean out probably waist-deep trash for half the building. And in there I found two old rolls of craft paper tape, which is what's inside there. And in 2001, I was working on an exhibition for Untitled in Oklahoma City, and I happened to take one of my tape measures, an early one, and I just kind of ran it through the hole. And I ran it through again, and I noticed the numbers were, sequencing, and I thought, this is too good to be true. And so I ripped out about 10 more feet of tape, and I ran it through and ran it through and ran it through and just held it in place. And I was just so excited. I was just thrilled. And so I took it home, and I told Sandra, I said, watch what this does. And so I ran it through, and she was like, that's cool. And I said, yeah. And so then I had to rip out the whole 50 feet of tape and run it through each time, because there's no cut. It's woven through each time. And so I did one like that. Fast forward to 2013, and I'm working on my show at Main Site, and I find this anvil, and I'm like, man, that tape measure piece would really be good on that. So I found the other roll of craft tape. It actually has underneath it, in a sequence around it, the Jesus prayer, which is primarily an Orthodox prayer, but it's used in the Catholic Church also. And kind of is me thinking of prayer wheels and things. And so I knew this time, unless the craft tape had swollen, which would have really screwed me, but it hadn't, I was able to wrap it tight enough and put it on the anvil. And it just so happened that I found an anvil that was in the shape of pie. And so sometimes if you're looking, things happen. So from there, I did a 5-foot version of these, 60 by 60, for Art Now at the old City Arts. It's Oklahoma Contemporary now. And I thought, man, that was hard. And then when Main Site approached me, and I went in to talk to Aaron, you come in the door, and it's kind of like here, but there's a 67-foot wall on one side. There's 2 rooms and a 67-foot wall, and I had already been by, and I didn't know the exact measurements yet, but I thought 3 9-foot paintings will eat that wall. And so we agreed on the show, and I said, okay, do you trust me? And bad choice, but they do. And so I started work on these. Now, that was 2.5 years before the show, because it took me 2.5, almost 3 years to collect 10,000 feet of measuring tape. I had done the math, and I knew I needed 7,500 feet or so, but I didn't want to start and get caught short. And it's not something you can go to the lumber yard or the art store and buy. So I started buying measuring tapes on eBay and everywhere I could find them. People would give them to me. Sandra was really, this is my wife Sandra back here in the mask. Sandra was like, every day she would come in from the mailbox with like 3 boxes of measuring. And you know what they are, because they're all like this big. And she's like, you got more tapes. And so I waited to begin until I got about 10,000 feet, maybe a little over, so that I was sure I wouldn't run out. And I just picked, the 9 feet was just the right size. It was, turned out here, it works out coincidentally to work with here. I had another piece that I was thinking about that would have used 108 as dimensions. In one way, I was going to use 108. I believe it was 108 millimeters would have been the primary dimensions on, but it was a grouping. But, and I can't go into it too much because it's still in my head and possible, but let's just say it had containers, and I could not come up with the right thing to put in them. And I don't like being just arbitrary or being if it's not authentic, it's just like problematic for me. So I can't just stuff things with. As you look around, I don't do any faux surfaces. I don't fake surface. When we're working on this, if somebody drops a screwdriver or a wrench or whatever, or like splits a piece of wood that's 120 years old, it exposes new wood. And we try to say, please, safety first, don't get crushed by a piece of wood that weighs 300 or 400 pounds. But second, don't drop something on it that's going to scar a piece of wood I can't get again. So if something does happen, I will tend to take either raw beeswax or black encaustic paint, which is beeswax, and I will just smear it. You'll see sometimes in restoration work, they will just patch something and leave the patch visible rather than try and fake the work. I got where I could make surfaces do whatever I wanted. It just, as things changed, that wasn't appropriate to the work. So does that kind of, okay. Okay, all right. Dave's an old friend and knows way too much about me and what I do. Yeah. Yeah, we'll go to the storage first. When I bought the boat, it was laying up against a tree, just propped against a tree so he could take pictures of it. Boats, a lot of places are stored, any number of ways. A lot of times in marinas and things, especially up where the weather is really bad and stuff, you'll see them forklifted up onto a set of shelves and stuff. My uncle had a boat dock with a hoist. He was a CB in the Navy, and he had a hoist where he could pull his boats in and raise them up so that they weren't slapping around. Boat cradles of various kinds. You know, people will put them up in a cradle of some kind and do work on them. So when I found the boat, I'd been thinking of boats had been in my mind for a long, long time. Some of my very early work dealt with iconography, primarily Catholic iconography, saint symbols and attributes of saints and so forth like that. And so I'd learned to sail a little bit when I was a kid, and then I'd done a fair amount of canoeing, and I was really caught up with St. James's journey to Spain and the evangelization of Spain. And even more so, the fact that, reportedly, he went back to the Holy Land where he was martyred and then was sailed to Spain in a rudderless boat by, the story varies. A couple of angels sailed him to Spain in a rudderless boat. Sometimes the boat is made of stone. And I just had a thing that I needed to do something with a boat. I looked for probably 20 years for a boat. And then this one showed up. And as it happens, I come to Sandra and I say, I found the boat. And she's like, oh God. How much? Where is it? And how much is it going to cost to ship it here or get it? And so usually I try to have all that stuff taken care of, you know. And but it worked out, and so I got it. And I had thought of putting it in a wall, you know, doing various things. And I do a lot of rope work. I kind of weave around here. I personally believe that as artists, me as an artist, I don't have a clue what I do or what I'm going to do, or at least early on. See you guys. Thank you. But looking back on stuff I've done, I can say, ooh, knots are a thing with me. You know, ropes are a thing with me. Rope craft is a thing with me. Repetition is a thing with me. So I was a Boy Scout. I learned to sail. I am a fly fisherman. Knots are just a part of what I do. And so I wove the net. There's splices in there because I wanted things to be seamless and spliced. And that's a real nautical thing, even though I've lived most of my life, other than 3 years on an island, I've lived smack in the middle of the United States. But the knots are at least appropriate for the job. You know, if it's a knot that's gonna hold itself with tension, you know, it'll be 2 half hitches, or if it needs to be tightened, it's a taut line hitch. If it needs to just be a loop that's not gonna go anywhere and I can put weight and tension on it, it's a bowline. You know, those are just a thing, and so they become this. In searching on eBay, sometimes I'm just buying this stuff because it's a cool thing. It's like, oh, I gotta have that. I don't know how I'm going to use it. I don't know what I'm going to do with it. There's a table there's a whole bunch of space out of my studio. It's just full of junk that I have no idea how it's going to come into play. And then it does. And when it comes into play, sometimes it just comes into play. And sometimes I see it after I have the things, and other times I see like the little silk fly line leader. I may see it on eBay and go, oh my God, I've had that New Testament since 1993, and I have not been able to find a way to use it. And I see the silk fly line on eBay, and I have to either buy it now, or I'm like, bidnapper stuff, and like I have to have that 45-cent thing. Nobody can outbid me on it. So I'm up all night, so that I can be there ready in case someone outbids me for a $2.50 little thing. And most of these things, they are the way I sat with some 16 by 20 paper, and I would just move the things. And most of the time I knew which 2 or 3 things were going to go, and I put them down, and that's how they go. I may tinker with them a little bit, but they almost always go back to the original. And usually I find when I tinker, I'm probably trying too hard. I'm trying to be clever. I'm trying to show you guys how good I am or whatever, and it's far better if I just take my hands out of it and let the things do what they do. Does that make sense? So, first, you don't need to know any of this stuff to get anything or not get anything from the work. It's kind of fun and maybe interesting, but the reality is none of it is necessary for someone to come in. If I can be honest and kind of brave enough, and this is where Sonner comes in, I can look and I can do something, and I can trust you, the viewer. I know what my thought is. I know what it doesn't, there's no meaning or anything. It just is a thing. And I know when it's right, but I have to be able to trust that I don't have to do more for someone to see it. It really helped. There's not too many, well, I don't know how many of you are artists or students or whatever. There will come a time when you're doing this that it's really good to have 1, 2, 3, 4 people that you can be completely honest with, and that they will be completely honest with you. It's not so much, it's not a critique of your work. I threw out critiques when I graduated graduate school, so I don't need them, nor do I accept them. But it helps if there's someone there that you can go to and talk about something before it's in a final form. Maybe even when it's just an idea. And that person knows you and knows what you do and can say, that's not crazy, man, And you're like, okay, that's great. That's all I needed to hear. Because sometimes I go so far that I go, this is crazy. I do tell stories. I don't see the world in stories, but I tell them. I was working on my show at City Arts, 2009 or something, and I had the big rope pieces, and I had the big barrel vault and a big wall, and I was working on a piece out of my studio, and as you come in the door, there's my kind of my painting wall, and I was working on a piece, and I was really struggling with it. And on this other side, above my table saw and stuff, I had gotten an old tarp that I'd found in this building, and I'd nailed this tarp to the wall and nailed 4 red shop rags to it. I folded 3 of them, nailed them to it, and then just nailed one just hanging. And it was, I don't know, 1 o'clock in the morning, and we're getting ready to go to bed, and I told Sandra, I said, I really need help. And I said, I really need you to come out and see this painting, because I'm kind of lost. So we go out to my studio. It's in a set of warehouses that's pretty much all weed except for me and the contractor now next to me. And we go out there and we come through the little office and come to the back, and I go to turn my lights on over here, and Sandra says, I really love that. And I was like, really? And I was like, because I'm having, she goes, not that one. She goes, that black tarp. And I was like, seriously? You like that? She's like, I love it. And I said, okay, I hardly did anything, which is typical of what I do, but occasionally you kind of doubt yourself. And she's like, no. She said, and I said, you know, I've been tinkering, you know, I just nailed it up there. It's just with finished nails, and, you know, it's no big deal. And she was like, it's perfect. And she said, how would you put it? And I said, well, at the gallery, I would just nail it to the wall. I said, I have to find the right nails because I can't use finished nails, but I have to find the right nails. And I found some sort of concrete nail that was like a wedge. It had a flat rectangular top, and it narrows to a point. And I thought, these are perfect. And I just bam, bam, nailed it to the wall of the gallery and nailed the 4 rags to it. But in the studio, I said, well, you know, I've been thinking maybe I should do something mathematical with it, something that gives it. And Sandra asked me, she said, why? I said, well, I don't know. I said, you know, sometimes I think I go so far over the edge with taking my hand out of stuff that people may not get it, that I may have to like kind of cave in and give a little bit of, and she's like, do you really think that? And I was like, no. And then she said, and even if they do, she said, do you really care? And I said, no, not really. She's like, then what are you worried about? And so it did. It went up like that at City Arts. And one of my students at the time, and a couple more actually, but one was really brave enough and honest enough and everything. She came up and she goes, you know, that just pisses me off. and I said, yeah, I get that, you know. And she's like, she goes, I don't understand. And I'm like, that's okay. You know, you don't have to, but it's right. Trust me, it's right.